in, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome into another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by Hoosier Illustrated. Always be sure to check out all the awesome content on HoosierIllustrated.com with Alec Lasley, Kyler Staley, the whole gang, keeping you up to date with Indiana football, basketball, all sorts of good stuff. Again, happy Friday. I'm feeling good here today on a Friday. Hopefully I've sounded like I've felt good on other days, but something about a Friday, especially the first Friday after a full week of doing these shows and doing things in my other job. And I'm also off from my other job, by the way. So that adds an extra element of, I guess, excitement to the weekend. I'm going to a Creed concert in Cincinnati, Ohio tonight. And some of you may be hearing that and thinking, he's a Creed fan, really? Next thing you're going to tell me that he likes Nickelback. And that's true. I also like Nickelback. I'm a big fan of the style of rock and roll, whatever you want to call it, that kind of gets categorized into a couple different derivative terms. Some call it dad rock. Some call it butt rock. There's multiple negative names that people give that style of music that came from the late 90s and early 2000s. But I do love me some Creed, and for those who don't know, they're on their reunion tour, at least their first reunion tour since 2012, I believe. It's been over 12 years since they played together, and I've never seen them live before, so I'm super excited to head up to Cincinnati this evening to Riverbend Music Center. Been to a few shows there before, including the aforementioned Nickelback that I mentioned earlier. Very good venue, outdoor venue for a summer concert. And it'll be Creed, Three Doors Down, and Finger 11. A good collection of dad rock bands for those of you who may indulge in the same likeness as me. So looking forward to that. It's supposed to rain tonight. I think the further I've looked ahead, or like the closer we've gotten to today, I do believe the rain chance has gone down a bit from where it was supposed to be. So maybe the rain will hold off for us, but we're prepared either way. Bringing the ponchos just in case. We do have lawn seats, so we will be exposed to the precipitation if it does decide to rain on us. But nonetheless, we're going to have a good time tonight, and I'm excited. Some of you may not care, but you know what? I'm sharing it with you anyways. Happy Friday once again to everybody who's with us here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. I watched gymnastics with my wife last night on NBC for the Olympics. And I know we talked a little Olympics earlier in the week, mentioned Lily King, how she's making another appearance, going for some medals and stuff like that. But I've never been a big viewer of the Olympics. And maybe that's something that should change, especially as I took in some of the gymnastics stuff last night. My wife's always been really into the gymnastics events. Loves watching Simone Biles and Suni Lee as well. One of the new, I don't think she's a newcomer, but she's one of the younger Olympians on this gymnastics team for the United States. But it's, I don't want to call it super fun to watch because I enjoyed it, but it's also not for everybody. But those athletes, excuse me, they are some of the most gifted with their physical being as there are of any sport, if that makes sense. So check out some of that stuff as long as it's still going on, if you haven't already, because I hope in the future, especially because I do know the U.S. is hosting the Summer Olympics, I believe 4 years from now. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's the case. So hopefully I can get into it more then. Somebody I work with in the afternoons, Nick Coffey, he says the same thing. The Olympics are something that every time it comes around, he says that he's going to get into them. And I've never said that, but it is something that when they come around, it does kind of feel like that I need to be paying attention to them. And not necessarily because I host a show or anything like that, but it's definitely a big talking point when it comes to things that not only people in the sports world are watching and paying attention to right now, but it's really a pop culture thing. And I hope that doesn't kind of minimize what it is, because I'm not trying to do that, but it's really the only, at least this summer, the only major national sporting event that goes on for a significant period of time leading up to the college football that we have coming up here at the end of August. So that's my little, I guess, take on the Olympics. Maybe I'll take in a little bit more of it as it goes on here the next week and a half or so. But I enjoyed watching it with my wife. And I think part of the enjoyment came from just sitting down and watching that with my wife because she enjoyed it. It's not something I would have turned on my own, but because she was invested in it and she asked me to sit down and watch it with her, that kind of got me a little invested in it too. So was very happy to take in a little Olympic gymnastics last night. Had a few people comment on last week's episode, or not last week's, on Wednesday's episode about the hotline. I did mention at the end of episode number 4 that I was thinking about implementing the hotline that I use for the Out of Touch podcast. And I think I am going to do that. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give that hotline number out today, here in just a moment. I may change the number. And what I mean by that is because this channel is affiliated with Hoosier Illustrated, I may open up a new number for Hoosier Illustrated specifically, depending on how this goes. We're going to do a trial run today, and I'm going to use the hotline number I use for the Out of Touch podcast, and that number is 502-830-9195. If you want to give this show a call, give me a suggestion of something that you want me to comment on, ask a question to hear my thoughts on anything specific about Indiana sports, you can do that. You can also ask me why I like Creed or something stupid along those lines. You can ask me whatever you want, but I will vet the voicemail calls that come through. So if you do leave a voicemail and I don't know, you're coming on and dropping F-bombs and stuff like that, and I know this isn't a radio show per se, like this doesn't air and like the FCC doesn't regulate it, that type of a thing, at least not in the way that they do with radio shows. You can swear, but if you're going to leave a message that just has a bunch of F-bombs in it or something of the like, I'm not going to air that type of message. So just be careful, I guess. You don't have to be too careful, but just be aware of kind of the loose guideline that I just applied. So if you want to leave a message, we'll do a trial run here, and you can send anything and everything to 502-830-9195. And we may give that a run. Depending on how many people leave a message on Monday, we may try that out on Monday and see how it goes. So that is that. Get into a little bit of college football here. And in a few minutes, I'm going to play an interview. And I hate calling it an interview because whenever I have guests on, it feels like it's more of a conversation. So a conversation with Dylan Sinn of the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette. I'm going to play that here in a few minutes. Talked with him earlier today, really about all of the local college football teams, Indiana, Purdue, and Notre Dame, with more of an emphasis on the Hoosiers, of course. And then also got his thoughts on Dallas James, the new Indiana basketball signee, transfer, if you will. And then also talked a little bit about how scholarships are changing in the future. And he kind of cleared up some things with that I didn't realize, like kind of make things more, I guess, help me understand a little bit better, like what's actually changing as opposed to just kind of guessing how it's going to go down. But it's also not official yet. And again, I won't spoil the conversation if that's even really a spoiler, but he gets into all of those details, and I'll play that interview for you all here in just a few moments. But one thing I want to start off with, obviously we talked a lot about Indiana football and fall camp getting rolling earlier this week, and head coach Curt Cignetti spoke with the media after day one. And I'll tell you what, he was dripping sweat. And it was obviously we're in the heat of August. I guess it may have been the end of July whenever their first practice took place, but it's hot. And you could tell it just by looking at the video presser. I'm going to play the audio or a little soundbite from his presser here in just a moment, but you could tell that they're working hard out there. Or at least, maybe he's just working hard, just standing there. Who knows? But let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and get into a comment that I found interesting from his first presser, at least for fall camp. And I'll share my thoughts on that here in just a moment. But here's what Curt Cignetti had to say after day one of fall camp earlier this week.
I think we want to get these guys playing football like the way we want them to play. We have a certain style: fast, physical, relentless, smart, disciplined, poised. Always been the least penalized team in the league, number one in turnover ratio, and very highly ranked in some key statistical categories, which lead to success. And kind of develop that relentless mindset and resilient, where you're not affected by the circumstances of practice or a game, by a good play or a bad play, or you're down 14 points. In the second quarter, you're not affected, or up 14 points. It's like our first conference game at JMU. We went to the Sun Belt. We play App Year. They beat A&M about a week or two later. They're perennial champs. We're down 28-3 down there. Nobody flinched. Came away with a win. 2-3 weeks later, happened again. So it's kind of a mindset and an identity, those intangibles that we want to develop in camp as well.
So a few things I want to unpack there. First off, he wants to be number one in the least penalized team in the Big Ten. And obviously that just became a lot harder. You had 4 teams to the mix. And also wants to be have the number one turnover ratio in the Big Ten. And I'm sure he's not the only head coach out there that is saying that type of stuff. Every head coach wants to be number one in every category, of course, but in those specific ones, you don't want to be turning the ball over, and you don't want to be penalized. Those, when you're a team that's heavy in those areas, that can often be the difference between winning and losing a lot of close games. And as Cignetti's talked before, he's really good at winning, or has been really good at winning those close games in the past at JMU specifically. And he's made it very clear he wants to do the same thing when he's at Indiana, or when he's, officially coaching games with Indiana here this upcoming fall. So it'll be interesting to see if any of that's able to come true. He also talked about the mentality of being down 14 and being able to stay in the game, or, multiple scores, that type of stuff. And also being ahead, just the different mindsets that you can be in depending on how the game is going. Because whenever you're up 14 points, especially if you're playing an opponent that maybe you should be beating by that much, or it's a more easier, if you will, it could be easy to get complacent and allow those teams to crawl back into those games. We've seen that happen with Indiana teams in the past. Or when you're down 14, it's very easy to get down on yourself. Again, on the other end of things, if you're playing against opponents like Ohio State, the traditional powers, Michigan, whoever it may be, and you're down by a large score, especially on the road. We've seen Indiana teams in the past fold in those situations. And so getting the players in the right mindset of how to compete in the thick of a very tough Big Ten season, and really any of your games, whether you're playing non-conference or conference opponents, it's going to be very critical to always, for these players to always be on alert for different situations that happen throughout each of the games. So I'm excited. Again, as I've always said, I do think he's going to have hopefully a majority of these guys prepared for the beginning of the season. And hopefully as that progresses, you begin to see a well-oiled machine. And no, I'm not talking about a team that should be competing for the Big Ten. I want to continue to emphasize that. I do think that Cignetti is serious when he says he wants to create that. I don't know how possible that will be in year one. I don't know if it will ever happen, if we're being completely honest, but I do think he's got this team heading in the right direction, especially in year one, where you've already raised the bar without playing a single snap against an opponent that wasn't yourself during the spring game, obviously. So I'm very excited to see what happens. I'm ready for them to kick off things against Florida International on the 31st, and we'll go from there. Because as we mentioned before, you got 8 home games. You're going to go from FIU to Western Illinois, a step down in competition from week 1 to week 2. So really in those first 2 weeks, you're not going to learn a whole lot about the full potential of this team. But as we've talked about time and again, right after those first 2 games, you travel to the West Coast, take on UCLA. And I know I've kind of poked my fun at Deshaun Foster and what he did at Big Ten Media Days, and I'll get into a little more. There's been a further development, if you will, with that. And it kind of turns out good for Deshaun Foster. We'll talk a little bit about that after the segment with Dylan Sinn. But that game in Los Angeles in the Rose Bowl will be a very pivotal moment on the direction for Indiana this season. And if they come out of that with a win, no matter if it's ugly, no matter if they dominate them, I mean, I guess there'll be different ways to spin it depending on the result. But at its very basic form, a win in that scenario is absolutely massive for Curt Cignetti in his first year. Because as we've talked about time and again, and you'll hear Dylan and I reiterate too, that opens the door for you to have a very successful record once the first half of the season concludes. So without further ado, I think I'll quit blabbering myself and I'll bring in good friend Dylan Sinn from the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette, and we'll continue this conversation on Indiana football right here. Joining me now is the one, the only Dylan Sinn from the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette. Happy Friday, my friend.
Happy Friday to you. What an introduction. Thank you for having me on.
Glad to have you. For those who may remember Dylan, he's made frequent appearances on previous show that I used to work with, and it's glad to have him on my own show. You're making your debut on In Touch with Indiana Sports. How do you feel about that, man?
I'm excited, man. I'm happy for you that this is a really cool thing that you're doing. So I'm looking forward to plenty of appearances with you. It should be a lot of fun.
Well, I'm very happy to have you along for the ride today. So you've been making your rounds around the state with Notre Dame, Purdue, and of course, Indiana football as it is now. We are now officially a month away, less than a month away, as a matter of fact, to kicking off the 2024 college football season. I'll go ahead and just start with Indiana. What are kind of your overall impressions from what you heard from Curt Cignetti, maybe a couple of the players, and really where the program may be heading as a whole right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to escape the idea that things are headed in the right direction. Yeah, we saw a little bit of practice the last couple of days. I was there yesterday. I like Curtis Rourke a lot. I mean, I did when he was at Ohio, so that hasn't really changed. He's got a good arm. He can make the throw to the far hash. He can get the ball down the field. And Curt Cignetti, the theme kind of seems to be for at least these first couple of practices at camp is really trying to develop consistency. That's what they want, is consistency of play, consistency of habits, and really try to get that. What Cignetti's message is he wants them to be able to run what they do under pressure, and even when they're down 14 points or so. He kind of compared it to his first season with JMU when they were in FBS in 2022, which was they came back and from 20 points down in 2 different games and won. He wants his team to be able mentally tough enough to do that. And that's something he'd been trying to build the entire offseason. Because remember he talked about all the way back in March, early in spring practice, he said there was kind of some softness in the program that they were trying to get out the door. And I think that that's something that they've been trying to kind of eradicate the entire offseason. That process is they believe working. And it's helped along by the fact that they have 13 James Madison transfers who are along for the ride, who believe that Cignetti can do that and are helping him to do it. So right now things are going well. Obviously, there's plenty to improve on. We'll see where things stand in a month, but there's a lot to like about this team right now.
I know he's really excited about the offense, and you already talked about Curtis Rourke and how he's kind of stepping into the role that he'll likely play with Indiana. But do you think all these comments about being able to come back whenever they may be down by a couple of scores, do you think that should bring some worry to fans who may be concerned about the defense? Because in previous years when Indiana's had really good offensive head coaches, the defense has been a major problem, and especially whenever Kevin Wilson was at the helm, it felt like they were constantly getting into shootouts, and I think that's something that fans are hoping to be able to avoid with this type of regime. And then before or after Kevin Wilson, you had Tom Allen, who is the antithesis of that when it came to offense. So with a program like Indiana, it seems like it's always been really difficult to find a happy medium between both sides of the ball. What do you think we'll get from Curt Cignetti with all that?
Yeah, I mean, I expect the offense to be a little bit further along than the defense at the start, right? Just because there's so much talent, they brought in so much talent on this offense. Not to say they didn't on defense. There are talented dudes on defense, and I think they're going to be fine there. But the offense just has so many guys who are ready to roll immediately. All those running backs they brought in, all those wide receivers. I've said it before. I think this is one of the best wide receiver groups in the Big Ten, which is saying something in a conference that has so many good rooms at that position. So Indiana's going to score points. They're going to score points quickly. I think the defense might be a little bit longer to get going. And that's not to say that they won't get going, because I think they will. I think there's plenty of talent on this defense. But I think that it's going to take some time to gel, especially in the secondary. There's a lot of new faces there. Obviously, losing Kobe Minor was hard. Losing Philip Dunham was hard. So those are things it's going to take a little bit to gel. Same with the defensive line rotation. There's a lot of new guys there. But there's also a lot of JMU guys there, guys who are really productive. And so I think that they'll figure it out there. I don't think it's going to be a Kevin Wilson team where you're winning games 49-45. I think that there is going to be something approaching a happy medium there. And I think that especially the defensive staff of Curt Cignetti is not planning on there being a shootout every week. That is not the plan. That is not what they signed up for. They are here to turn Indiana into a top half of the Big Ten defense. And they did so at JMU. JMU's defense was really good last year after somewhat struggling in 2022 in their first year in FBS. So I think that there will be some growing pains on defense in a way there might not be on offense, but I think they'll figure it out.
I'm sure you've had a chance to look or at least glance at Indiana's schedule. They have a very favorable slate in Curt Cignetti's first year, 8 home games. You only travel to the West Coast once to face UCLA. And it feels like Cignetti is really set up for success. And I'm not talking about winning the Big Ten or anything, but success relative to what Indiana is used to in his first season. If you were a fan or if you were somebody who is evaluating, I guess, where the program could be at the end of this season, where would you set the bar at for this year?
Yeah, so Curt Cignetti has talked frequently about not setting the bar too low. He said at Big Ten Media Days, well, we'll be happy if we go to a bowl. No, we won't, like that kind of thing. So he was very adamant about that. I will be impressed if IU goes to a bowl game. I think that going 6-6 will be just fine. That will be enough to get you to say, hey, Curt Cignetti's offseason boasts about, hey, we're going to come in and win immediately. He was right. They won immediately. They went to a bowl. Maybe you win a bowl, right? They haven't won a bowl in 30 years. That would be a great way to kind of turn the page into a new era, right? And so I think that is a worthy goal. I think Curt Cignetti obviously has set the bar higher. I don't think 7-5 or 8-4 is out of the question. I think there's only one team on Indiana's schedule that was good last season, essentially, and does not have a new coach this year. That's Ohio State. Obviously, Michigan has a new coach. Washington has a new coach. UCLA has a new coach, right? These teams were all good last year. We don't know what they're going to be this year, right? And then there are a lot of other opportunities for winnable games on the schedule. So I do think 6 is where you set the bar to start until we see otherwise. Obviously, Cignetti has his own bar, and that's perfectly fine. But I think that 6 is right where you want to be. I think that the important thing with this schedule is that it kind of allows Indiana to build some momentum, right? You get two you get 2 winnable games right at the start with Florida International and Charlotte. And then you can play UCLA on the road. It's a UCLA team that I think is going to really struggle this season. Deshaun Foster has an uphill battle ahead of him just because he got hired so late in the cycle. So you win that game, maybe, then you're 3-0, you win another game, and you're 4-0 going into the Maryland game at home. Maryland should be fine this year, but I don't think they're unbeatable. And if you get them when you're undefeated and you get them at home, you start to build some momentum. Later, you get Nebraska. It's another one where if you're 5-1 or 6-0 at that point, you feel like we can beat this team no matter how good they are. So it allows you to build momentum and build confidence as you go, which is exactly what Cignetti wants.
And it is crazy, and I won't dwell on this too much, but it is crazy to think that there is a possibility, a road for Indiana to, if things really play out the way that Cignetti hopes they do, that they could be 6-0 before they've ever been 6-0, I feel like. I don't know the last time an Indiana football program has gotten bowl eligible before taking a loss. So if that ends up being the case, I'm sure there won't be a single person who wouldn't be surprised about that. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, because again, that's, even though there is a path to it, it just does seem like it will be, you'll have to overcome a lot of obstacles. Again, you already mentioned UCLA, even though they could be a struggling UCLA team this year, that is your road game out on the West Coast. You'll have Maryland, who is trying to learn an offense without Talia Tagovailoa, and then you'll be traveling to Northwestern, who is playing not even a new stadium. It's a weird, like, practice field type of situation that you'll have to play on. So a lot of interesting games for Indiana in the first half of the season, so I'm excited to see how things play out for the Hoosiers and Kurt Cignetti. Let's go ahead and move up to West Lafayette and South Bend real quick. What are your kind of overall impressions on Purdue as they move into their second year with Ryan Walters?
Yeah, so the biggest thing to know about Purdue is that they were picked to finish dead last in the Big Ten. That 18th out of 18, that was a big discussion point during Big Ten media days. I just think that that's incorrect. I don't think that's right. I think that they got better as the season went along last year, and as Ryan Walters kind of settled into being a head coach, I think they improved significantly as the season went on. And I think they'll be better this year. I think that people saw them lose Nick Scorton and they saw them lose Deion Burks and thought, well, they have nothing left. And that's not true. They brought in some really important pieces. They kept Kedron Jenkins, which was huge. For as good as Scorton was, Kedron Jenkins was the one who led the team in tackles for loss last year. He was second in the entire Big Ten in tackles for loss. So he's going to be very good this year, moving to inside linebacker. Hudson Card is back for a second year as a starter. And there's a really good track record in college football the last couple of years of guys who transfer and then their second year at the new school. There's a really good track record of those guys. So I think Hudson Card, if he stays healthy, he's going to have a really big year. Their offensive line should be really, really good in front of him. I think that they bring back some talent there, and they brought in several guys who are starter quality players from the transfer portal. And then in the secondary, which is where Kurt Cignetti's defense, Ryan Walters' defense really shines. He's really done a great job of getting athleticism in that secondary. They are super athletic back there at this point. And that's what made Ryan Walters' defense when he was Illinois so good, was an athletic secondary that could kind of just get after you, tackling and covering. And I think he is starting to have that. And so I think Purdue has a path to a bowl game. It's tough. It's a tougher path than Indiana's is. I think they might be a better team with not a much better record, like 4-8 or 5-7 again, but that's more of a function of the schedule because it is a tough schedule.
They have 11 Power 4 opponents, I believe, on their
schedule.
Right.
They did themselves no favors by scheduling Notre Dame in the non-conference. Like, that's one of those things you're going to see less and less of that in the Big Ten, I think, just because it's such a gauntlet of a conference schedule. You don't need to schedule these tough non-conference games. Obviously, it's not Ryan Walters' fault. The game against Notre Dame was scheduled far before. So was the Oregon State game, although I think they can win that one. But it's a tough road, but I do think they'll be better than last year. I don't think they will finish dead last. I think they're going to win 2 or 3 conference games, which would be just fine for a team that is still trying to build and figure out what it's going to be in the Big Ten. And I think that there's going to be noticeable improvement. Just if you watch the team, you're going to notice improvement from last year, which is what you want in a second-year head coach.
And real quick from Notre Dame, do you expect them to be competing for a spot in the new 12-team playoff this year?
Well, they better be, right? Like that's kind of the bar. If not, you're feeling a lot of pressure from Marcus Freeman going into year 4 next season. I do think they're good enough to be in contention. I think obviously the biggest question is how rusty is Riley Leonard? He got hurt last year, missed some games. He got hurt against Notre Dame, actually, the really bad ankle injury, which was unfortunate for him. He was having a great season. And so he looked healthy. We saw him in camp on Wednesday or Tuesday rather. He looked healthy. Marcus Freeman said that he was able to let it rip the entire summer, so that was good to hear. Benjamin Morrison, the star cornerback, he looked healthy, which was not a given. He had shoulder surgery in the offseason, so this is a team with plenty of talent. There are holes to fill, though. I think that's the losing 2 top 60 draft picks at your tackle spots on offense is really, really tough to overcome, even for a team that pumps out offensive linemen like Notre Dame does. So that's going to be something to watch going into the season. Is, hey, how is the protection going to look here? Because Riley Leonard obviously is coming off an injury. He's an athletic guy, but if his athleticism is only 80-90% of where it usually is, then what are we talking about here? And so that's going to be maybe what makes or breaks Notre Dame, is if they can find replacements at right and left tackle. And they feel like they have them. They have 5-star recruits set to start at both positions. Those guys just haven't started before, but they feel really good about those guys. Just a question of them stepping up.
Transitioning now to Indiana basketball. For those who may have missed it, they finally added and I say finally, I don't think really many people were expecting them to necessarily fill that last scholarship spot, but that is exactly what Mike Woodson did earlier this week. They brought in transfer Dallas James, a center from South Carolina State, likely to be a role player, not even really just by default. That's, if you look at his numbers, Dylan, I'll let you expand upon that here in a second, but he's not somebody who is likely going to be putting up big numbers for you. He's going to be someone who is more than likely just going to fill a role on the floor if someone like Umar Ballo or Langdon Hatton is in foul trouble or not producing at a rate that they need to be producing at. So I don't think fans will be looking to expect a whole lot out of Dallas James other than to just go in there and do his job when he's called upon.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. I mean, he averaged, I believe, 1.7 points last year. And I mean, he shot like 54% from the field. So he just wasn't, his role on that team was not shooting the basketball. And that's fine. He was a defensive minded player. I think he averaged almost 4 blocks per 40 minutes last year, which is really impressive. He is actually a very good rim protector. 7 feet tall, 235 pounds. A guy who can fill it, like you said, fill a role for you. I think he slots in as the 4th string center behind Ballo, Hatton, and then probably Malik Renew would get minutes at center before you put Dallas James in the game most of the time. Yeah. He's probably not going to play that many minutes. It's more of having a guy with a lot of experience who knows how to play basketball in practice, I think, to go against those guys and to give them a different look in practice. I think it's really valuable just to have that. And it's a guy whose dad played in the NBA for a decade too, Jerome James. So it's just a guy who knows basketball, who's really, really smart. He had a 4.0 GPA at South Carolina State. That was one of the things that Mike Woodson mentioned in the statement that he released, was just how intelligent this kid is. And I think that's going to help in having him in practice every day, having him pushing Ballo and Hatton and making it difficult for them to score around him in practice and giving them another look. So that's the reason to do this. He only has 1 year of eligibility left, so it's not like you're holding up a scholarship for next season. And it's just a way to get another body in practice that's going to help you. I think that's what Mike Woodson did.
And speaking of scholarships and the amount that you get and that type of stuff, have you seen the stuff where, and I don't know if this goes into effect next year or when this is, I guess, becoming a thing, but the new scholarship numbers for basketball, football, and really every sport with the NCAA, I do believe basketball is moving from 13 to 15. And to me, I guess there's a number of different ways you can look at it. I don't think it's necessary to add scholarships to the basketball program. I'm not just talking about Indiana, but any basketball program, because with 13 scholarship players, you've already got 2 to 3 guys more than likely who are struggling to get minutes or just not getting maybe what they want to get, depending on what team they play for. But in adding 2 to the fold, you can look at it either as, okay, we can just give a couple walk-ons some scholarships, or if you look at it more of the way that I do is, okay, you're going to add a couple guys who may have some talent that may not see the floor the way that they would if there were less scholarships, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. The keys to know about that is, yes, it will go into effect next season for 2025, 2026. It is not finalized yet. The judge still has to go through it's the House settlement, the NCAA case. The judge still has to approve the settlement. She's working on that right now. We'll see what she has to say about it. She might tell them to go back to the drawing board on certain aspects. And it's not a scholarship cap. It is a roster cap. You can now give as many scholarships because the rule is you can now give as many scholarships as you want, but you can only have a certain number of players on the roster. So you can go from 50, you have 15 guys on the roster at any given time. A good comparison point is women's basketball, which has had a scholarship cap of 15 for years. They frequently don't fill all of their scholarships. And so I don't think men's basketball will always fill 15 scholarships either. But for at least one off season, it is going to create I've heard this from several people who know, it's going to create a huge run in the transfer portal. Like there are going, and in football too, there are going to be a ton of players in the transfer portal last year, because there are players who would not have had a spot at somewhere like Indiana who are going to get scholarship offers from Indiana probably next year, right? And so they're going to say, hey, I was playing at Missouri Valley School X. I want a chance to play at Indiana. I'm going to take it, even if I mean I have to fight for minutes. There are going to be some guys who probably feel that way. And so you're going to have a lot of guys who enter the transfer portal, even more than we've seen the last couple of years. So it's going to be fascinating to watch that play out and see people kind of find their level over the next couple of years. I don't think anyone really knows how it's going to play out. Who's going to fill 15? Who's going to fill 15 roster spots? Who's going to leave some open? Who's going to have more players on scholarship that are just kind of not on the roster, but are kind of waiting in the wings? How's that going to work with redshirting and all of that? So it's going to be really interesting to see. And again, it creates another different element on how you manage your roster that you're going to have to figure out as a coach.
And it is funny how that's coming right at the end of what seemed like has been the never-ending, the COVID year players. This is the final season of the COVID players. A lot of people thought they were going to have a bunch of extra spots to fill for next season. And not only that, but you're going to have a couple more on top of that potentially, depending on how many guys you actually have leaving your team. So,
like IU's going to have IU could have as many as 9 scholarships to fill next offseason. Like depending on how many freshmen they bring in this class, they could go get 9 guys in the transfer portal next offseason, just based on guys who are running out of eligibility this offseason. Not if anyone who has eligibility left transfers, you know.
So I was going over the scholarship numbers yesterday, and just to give you a kind of a breakdown there. So you're automatically losing 6 guys due to losing eligibility. Right. On top of that, you have Renew, who has NBA potential. You have Mbako, who has NBA potential. And I believe Kanan Carlisle is believed to have some NBA potential coming into this season. So you mentioned 9 guys. So that's a very realistic number to potentially see Indiana have to replace that amount of scholarships for next season, which is crazy.
And then you have the 2 extra on top of that. So you have the 2 extra on top of that. So you got as many as 11, right? Like it's kind of crazy how many, like Indiana could be bringing in 11 new players next season just to fill the roster limit.
It's nuts. So what do you got coming up at the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette, Dylan?
Yeah, well, we have I'm covering the Tin Caps here late in the season. Obviously, that is as their season winds down here in August and September, and then obviously, as you said, I'm making my rounds. I'm going to all the football camps. I've not been to West Lafayette yet. I will be there next week, so looking forward to that. But I will be back at Notre Dame probably sometime next week as well. So. Looking forward to all of the camp and football in less than a month here. So very excited.
Well, thank you for taking the time to come on In Touch with Indiana Sports for the first time, and I appreciate it, and I look forward to having you on again in the future.
Absolutely, John. Thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Good stuff there from Dylan Sinn. Glad to have him make his debut on In Touch with Indiana Sports here on this Friday. So there you have it. A lot of good stuff on the football side of things. Also, in just a moment, I want to get into a few of the week 1 matchups that involve Big Ten teams and just kind of see where the spreads are at, because for those who may not be aware, I like to dabble in the betting side of things a little bit. Thankfully, I'm not addicted to gambling. I don't think I ever will be. I'm pretty smart with how I handle it, but I am looking forward to potting up my DraftKings app, and I'm not sponsored by DraftKings. They're just the app that I prefer to use. But I'm looking forward to getting back on DraftKings and putting little wagers here and there here on some college football. So I want to take a look at a few of those matchups here in a minute. I did make a few futures bets at the end of last season, one for college football and one for college basketball. I had a little bit of money left in the account, and so instead of withdrawing it wasn't enough to really withdraw it and use something on it with. So I just made a couple of futures bets that Usually you don't win those, but it's one of those, if they do hit, they do typically pay out fairly well. One bet I made is for Louisville to win the ACC in football. I won't get into the details of what that would pay out. Obviously, I guess we can share those down the road if it feels like it's necessary to. But I did predict the U of L to win the ACC in football. I do believe they were picked 4th or 5th in the ACC media poll that was released for preseason. And then another college basketball bet I made, I should say, UConn to three-peat for a national championship. And I don't believe that's happened since UCLA won however many it was they won in a row way back in the day. So obviously it's very unlikely for that to play out, but we may be entering a new era, new dynasty, if you will, with UConn men's basketball. And already with the fact that Dan Hurley turned down the Lakers to remain at UConn, excuse me. I mean, that says a few different things. One, I do think a lot of how that went down, I do think a big factor, and this is just speculation. I don't have anybody who told me this, obviously. But I do think a big factor in why Dan Hurley didn't take the job with the Lakers is because he didn't want to be a part of the Bronny James trauma. Because I'm sure many of you will agree with this. Maybe you won't. But Bronny James, he has no business being drafted. He had no business being drafted and playing in the NBA right now. It is strictly because of the association with his father. And because LeBron wants to play with his son before he ends up retiring on the same team, obviously. So, and he had a fairly poor, it wasn't the worst summer league ever Bronny James had, but the only reason he's going to see minutes on the floor with the Lakers is because he's going to get to play with his dad. And I guess that in and of itself is cool. It's a shame that he hasn't lived up to his ability to really kind of prove that he deserves to get to do that. Because if his name wasn't Bronny James, or rather if he wasn't his son, no matter what his name is, he'd still be playing at USC right now. And as a matter of fact, he may not have even been playing at USC in general. He may have been playing at a lower school to get more minutes and, more opportunities to prove himself, because he is only where he is currently. And I know he had some injuries last year, and that kind of hindered him a little bit, more so than maybe your average player. But point being with all of this, he could have benefited from at least another year in college to develop. Because I don't think LeBron James is going anywhere in the next couple of years. Maybe I'm dead wrong about that. Maybe he's going to retire at the end of this year. Who knows? But LeBron James is far from being out of touch, no pun intended, with the rest of the NBA. That may have been a poor attempt at a joke, but he's still the dominant LeBron James. Now, I know he's not prime LeBron James anymore, but LeBron is still LeBron, just like Tom Brady was always Tom Brady and could have kept going if a team wanted him, or if he wanted to keep playing, I guess I should say. So I don't think LeBron's going anywhere, and I don't think it was necessary to do Bronny like that. But he's kind of embracing being the son of LeBron James and all that it comes with. So I guess back to my original point with Dan Hurley is I do think he is in the midst of potentially creating a dynasty with UConn. And even if they don't win another national championship this year, if they are consistently at the top of the polls this season, and maybe he makes another Final Four run but doesn't fully get all the way this year, that doesn't take away from them potentially becoming a dynasty, if you will. I guess I don't know what the actual requirements are, if there are any written rules for what really defines a dynasty. But as long as Dan Hurley is coaching in college basketball and at UConn, I think we are seeing, and really we've already seen, kind of a passing of the torch from those of Mike Krzyzewski and Roy Williams over to Dan Hurley as the next big-time college basketball coach, and I hope he sticks around. As much as I don't, like, I guess as an Indiana fan, I'd love to see Indiana get back to being a powerhouse. It's good for college basketball to have somebody like Dan Hurley affiliated with the sport. And if he would have run off to the NBA, and that's probably not the best term to use, I think college basketball would have suffered. I don't know who UConn would have hired. There was speculation that would have been a hire from within. But if you remove Dan Hurley, who's the big name coaches left in college basketball? I know you still have Tom Izzo, but Tom Izzo hasn't done anything of note in the last, what? I mean, I guess he's had a couple decent tournament runs, but he hasn't been relevant, at least compared to the Michigan State standard that he set all those years ago, in a long time. And that doesn't mean he can't find a way to replicate that success down the road or even this year. But he's also on his way out here soon. Tom Izzo, maybe I'm wrong about this as well, but I don't see him coaching longer than maybe 3 more seasons at max. So we'll leave that there. Anyway, where was I going? Oh yeah, we were going to go into Week 1 Big Ten football matchups just to get ourselves familiar. We'll obviously revisit all of these down the road, and maybe I'll change my thoughts on them. And again, I don't really know a lot about each of these teams right now, so take with what I say with a grain of salt, and we'll just enjoy talking a little Big Ten football, as I'm very excited for things to get rolling here in just a few weeks. A little sip of coffee for you. I've got I'm not going to get off on a tangent because then I'll just lose my train of thought. And we need to get into these college football games. We'll talk more about coffee later, I guess, right? So here we go. Thursday, August 29th is the first day that will feature any Big Ten teams. And you'll have 3 in action that day. You'll have Rutgers taking on Howard from the FCS. You'll have Minnesota taking on North Carolina at home. And you'll have Illinois hosting Eastern Illinois, another FCS opponent, as well on that day. Obviously, the biggest matchup of those 3 is North Carolina traveling to Minnesota. Minnesota currently a 2.5-point favorite in that game, so close to being a pick'em in that one. I don't know. So here's the thing about betting on college football and really any sport in the opening week. A lot of it, you're just guessing. So it'll be tough when it really comes down to what I'm going to pick for these games. So I'm not sure. That may be a stay away game for me when it comes to Week 1. And obviously, I bet on teams that aren't affiliated with the Big Ten, but we'll just stick with the Big Ten for today. And as we get closer to college football, and really when we get to the week of, I'll share what I'm going to pick for, all of college football for that opening week, or even week 0 as we have now historically going on in college football. So on that following Friday, the next day, we've got Florida Atlantic at Michigan State. We've got Western Michigan at Wisconsin. Michigan State favored in that game, minus 11.5 by 11.5 points, I should say. Wisconsin favored by 24.5. And before that, by the way, I want to clear up something in case some of you were wondering why I didn't give the spread for Rutgers and Illinois. When you face an FCS opponent, they don't show spreads. Now, that doesn't mean you can't bet on them on certain apps, but they usually don't show. Just because it's whenever you're playing, whenever FBS is facing FCS, it's usually kind of expected for it to be a blowout, like normally upwards of 28, 30 points. So that's why you usually don't see spreads for games that feature FCS opponents. So obviously Michigan State coming in with a brand new head coach, just like Indiana. Jonathan Smith coming in from Oregon State. And so again, a lot of unknowns with the Spartans. They're favored by 11.5. I don't know much about Florida Atlantic. So we'll have to wait and see. That 11.5 is probably, so the odds makers know what they're doing, right? More often than not, they're usually right on the money when it comes to what they've laid out for the spread. That's why it's usually so close on whether or not your bet hits sometimes. So that 11.5 point spread's probably fair, I would say. Wisconsin's favored by 24.5 against Western Michigan. That seems like a lot of points, or a lot of points for them to score with. So, well, I don't really have thoughts on that either, at least in terms of, I guess to go back to what I said earlier. Some of you are probably wondering, why are we even doing this? Like, you don't know about any of these teams. And that's true. But for me, it's fun to just look at what the spread is and kind of see what they're projecting these matchups to be like. Illinois State at Iowa gets us going on Saturday. No spread for that. Illinois State, an FCS opponent. UConn traveling to Maryland. Maryland favored by 21. It'll be interesting to see what Maryland's offense looks like without Talia Tagovailoa. I felt like he was there forever. And yeah, so it'll be kind of a new look Maryland team going into 2024. Penn State at West Virginia, rivalry matchup. Penn State favored in that game by 10.5 points. I think Penn State is looking to be pretty good this year. And Tom Allen, former Indiana head coach, obviously going to be the new D coordinator with the Nittany Lions. So if I were picking, that's something I probably would pick if I had to pick something today. I'd probably pick Penn State to cover at West Virginia. It is a road game, obviously, so that will make it a little difficult, especially in a rivalry environment. And man, Morgantown, West Virginia is, if you've ever seen videos of how the crowds act, whether they be in the stadium or on the, in the tailgate fields, West Virginia is, they're a breed of their own, I'll say. And moving forward, we got Indiana State at Purdue, no spread on that one. And then before we get to Indiana, Florida International, we'll share the rest of them. We'll round things out with Indiana's matchup with FIU. But we got UTEP at Nebraska. Nebraska favored by 27.5 points. That's a lot, especially when you consider Nebraska has never really lived up to their billing in the last few years. But Matt Rule expecting to take a step forward with the Cornhuskers this year, so maybe that will meet the 27.5 point spread expectations. Ohio State and Akron, minus 50.5. 50.5. That's a lot. Ohio State not necessarily known for not covering that. I hope I worded that correctly. So I really wouldn't be surprised either way, because here's the thing. Ohio State will kill Akron, but it's a matter of, will they let off the brakes early and bring in their second and third string guys, get them some reps, and struggle to get over that 50.5 point spread. That's really what that comes down to. Moving forward, Miami of Ohio at Northwestern. Northwestern favored by 4.5. Don't know much about Miami of Ohio. Northwestern coming off a good season under last year. He was his first year head coach, David Braun. So that 4.5, I'd probably take Northwestern to cover that. Again, don't know how good Miami of Ohio will be, but if Northwestern's going to continue to be decent under David Braun, you would think they'd win that game by a touchdown or two. Moving forward again, Fresno State at Michigan. Michigan with brand new head coach, promoting Sharon Moore from coordinator to head coach. Michigan favored by 21 points against Fresno State. That seems fair for a first-year head coach against a decent program in Fresno State. I know they're not a power program, but they've always had a lot of success at the level that they're from in the Mountain West. And then we get out to the West Coast teams playing their first games as members of the Big Ten Conference. Idaho and Oregon. Idaho, member of the FCS, so there is no spread in that game. UCLA traveling to Hawaii. They are 14-point favorites. And that's always an interesting game, the teams that travel out to face Hawaii. Because that's a destination that it not only do you have the jet lag no matter where you're from, but that's just a weird environment in general for a college football game. And not only that, but UCLA, at least from when you think about how it affects Indiana's matchup in week 3, UCLA has a bye week in week 2, right after their opening game against Hawaii. So they'll have a little extra rest after they travel to the islands to take on the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. And Hawaii is a weird team. They've had some decent seasons, but they've also had some horrible seasons. So that 14-point spread, that could go in either way, especially when we talked about how good or bad UCLA may be. So 2 more matchups to go over. Weber State and Washington. No spread in that one. FCS opponent. And then Sunday night football, college football, that is. USC taking on LSU in Las Vegas in the Kickoff Classic in Vegas. Be a good first opponent, really first marquee matchup of the year for any team in the Big Ten. LSU favored in that game by 6. Lincoln Riley's squad will be looking to prove themselves, I should say, against a good SEC opponent. And that'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. Again, that spread probably really on the money. So again, I'll quit saying this, at least I'll try to. But it's really tough to tell what to take, especially in some of these marquee games when it's this early and you don't know about how some of these teams are going to play out. I'll say it like this. I think Colin Cowherd's mentioned this before, but it always stuck with me. Bad teams don't know they're bad yet. Good teams don't know they're good, but you can kind of, it's a little different, but teams that are going to be bad don't know they're bad yet. So they'll likely play a little better in the first couple of weeks of the football season before they get into the meat of things and kind of realize what they're up against with themselves. So it's a little rundown of some of the college football, really all the college football matchups that feature Big Ten teams in week 1. So let's go ahead and finish up with Florida International and Indiana. I almost forgot for whatever reason. But Indiana favored by 21 points currently against FIU. And what I'll say about that, strictly speaking, on what we've heard about Indiana so far and the offense that they're trying to create, I'd hammer Indiana to cover that spread. It may be close. It may be maybe one touchdown more, but I think Cignetti, if he has the personnel to do what he wants to do, I think he's going to try to kill FIU in that opener, to leave a statement, because as we've seen, he doesn't want other teams to see him as someone who's going to be walked over and that his program is going to be walked all over. So I think he's going to try to send a message in that opening game. So I think Indiana, wouldn't surprise me if they blow the doors off of Florida International if the personnel is up for it. So there you have it. My thoughts on some of the Big Ten opponents heading into week 1. And again, we're a month away, so we'll probably revisit some of those as we get closer to the football season. And we'll leave it at that. I talked about earlier how I was going to mention the development with Deshaun Foster. And I'll say it's good stuff. It's good news for him. And it's not even really news. It's really just the way he played into the way that he handled himself at Big Ten Media Days. And for those who don't remember, whenever he was up on the podium, he didn't really know what to say. He was just like, we're UCLA, we're in LA, so is USC. And he was just very, very awkward with the whole thing. But he was seen wearing a shirt, black Nike shirt that says, so it's got the outline of California, the state of California, and it's got a UCLA football helmet, and in text it reads, "We're in LA." So he's leaning into it. And that's exactly what you want to do when you have a goof up like that and you're being clowned on the internet. It doesn't matter what it is, almost. Nearly anything can apply to this. If you lean into it and embrace kind of becoming an internet meme, even if it is negative, then you've won. Then you've won. And no matter what happened prior to it, you've just shown that you've accepted the goof up and you're having a good time with it. And that's exactly what it seemed like he's trying to do. So shout out to Deshaun Foster for embracing what went down at Big Ten football media days. With that being said, I think that's going to wrap us up here on this Friday. Thanks for jumping in as always. First full week, like I said at the beginning, first full week of shows. This is episode number 5 now. I'm very happy with how things have gone so far. I'm excited about the future of what the future holds for the show. And again, if you want to leave a message, you can hit that hotline, 502-830-9195. And we may give that a spin on Monday, depending on how much comes through, what comes through. it's just an experiment. And that phone number may change in the future. Again, this is just a trial run. We're using the same number that I use for the Out of Touch podcast. So again, thanks for joining me today. Happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend. We'll do this again on Monday. Appreciate you guys sticking with us. I'm going to go have fun at a Creed concert tonight, and I'll share my thoughts on that a little bit on Monday. Hopefully I have some good things to report. So until then, I'll talk to you guys again on Monday.